There's something about summer and getting ready every day that makes me rethink what I'm going to wear. And of course, I want lighter fabrics and better materials, things that feel good on my skin in the moment and also make me feel like I look good. It's one reason I keep coming back to Quince because the focus there is on high quality essentials, breathable fabrics like soft organic cotton, washable silk, my very favorite, breathable linen, without the luxury markup. Quince has really beautiful everyday pieces starting at $32. They've got European linen pants and dresses. The denim there is soft and easy to wear, and pretty much everything you will find compares in quality to top brands, but is 50 to 80% less in cost. They work with ethical factories and they basically just cut out the middlemen. So what you're paying for is quality rather than brand markup. They also have stuff for the kitchen. They have bedding, all kinds of things. I have to say this summer, my favorite new Quince item is a tote bag. It's the Italian leather trapeze tote. I am really excited to take it with me as my personal item on plane trips this summer. And maybe you will like something similar. Elevate your summer wardrobe. Go to quince.com/KERA for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That is QUINCE.com/KERA. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/KERA.
This show is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
Ostensibly in celebration of the country's 250th birthday, specifically on the day President Trump turned 80, there was a special event held recently on the South Lawn of the White House. Not a concert or a dance or a theatrical performance, televised but not free to watch. It was a UFC fight in a $60 million temporary structure called the Claw, available to any American willing to pay $8.99 for access to Paramount Plus. From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Chris Boyd. What might once have read like over-the-top parody is now just current events. 21st century satire needs to be pretty extra. So brace yourself for the synopsis I'm about to give you. It is a novel that imagines a mysterious sort of sickness overtaking Americans, uncontrollable weeping breaking out among people at political rallies. The president, who is never technically named but clearly is Donald Trump, wants this weirdness to stop. He's delighted when a UFC fighter who calls himself Rasputin displays the ability to quell these outbreaks as if by magic. Maybe actually by magic. Rasputin emerges as a prime choice to join the ticket if the Trump figure makes a run for a third term, until his astonishing hypermasculine magnetism threatens to eclipse that of the president himself. Jonathan Swift might have needed psychedelics to attempt something like this, but as far as I know, novelist Ben Fountain did it sober. He is a recipient of the National Book Critics Circle Award, among numerous other distinctions. His new book is called Rasputin Swims the Potomac. Ben, welcome back to Think.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be back, and I love your description of the book.
Well,
Thank you for that.
Thank you. I really enjoyed reading it. I never knew what was coming next. I normally wouldn't start an interview with a question like this, but I have to know, did you in fact pay to watch that UFC fight at the White House?
No, I didn't. I'm not a UFC fan by any stretch of the imagination, and I don't know. I think it's very weird that some people think nothing says America like two human beings in a cage beating the snuff out of each other. So I really didn't want any part of it.
Just for people who are not familiar with the sport, how is UFC different from something like pro wrestling or boxing?
Well, I mean, actually, in the book, Rasputin is a pro wrestling champ, and so he's in a ring, and I mean, the wrestling we all grew up with and are exposed to now, through WWE. That's the kind of martial arts he does. UFC is a step beyond. It's two human beings who are placed in a wire cage, and it's a no holds barred, you know, like fight. You can kick, punch. I mean, just everything is allowed. And it's a really brutal display of pugilism. My understanding is that it was banned in most states until about 20 years ago, and then it gradually became legalized in various states. John McCain called it human cockfighting.
Hmm.
He found it loathsome and disgusting. And I've been asking people the last few weeks as the UFC match on the White House lawn has approached. I was like, "What do you think about all this?" And universally, the response was disgust, surprise, um, and just you know, we live in very strange times, and this is just another example of our times.
I didn't watch it either. I'm not much for violent entertainment of any kind, but I did see photographs after, and the thing I have to say that I found most jarring was the White House proper being used as a kind of green room slash locker room for the fighters themselves. And it takes us right to that blurred line that this novel goes to, which is the line between political theater and actual theater.
Yeah, I think I mean, theater has always been part of politics. Presentation, degrees of charisma, um, grooming, how people dress, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, theater is simply part of politics and always has been. I think we're living in an era of hyper theatricality. And partly that's due to the fact that we live in a media age, a hyper media age. And so much of reality comes to us through the screens of our lives, which more and more dominate our lives. And so presentations are ever more curated, ever more determined, ever more deliberative. All kinds of technical games can be played with looks, with voice, background, et cetera, et cetera. So really what happened the other day at the White House is just one more example of our current reality.
All right, I want to talk about your fictionalized version of the Trump presidency. First of all, the text has every specific mention of what we imagine would be the name Trump redacted. There's no question that this fictional president is a version of the real one we actually have. Did you actually type the name out while you were writing?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the president redacted in the novel is the inspiration is Donald Trump. And the first draft, it was Trump. And about halfway through the second draft, I realized I was getting tired of his name. And so just for the heck of it, I was playing around with alternatives. Like I didn't want to make it some kind of silly riff on his name like Stump for Grumpf. And at the time the Epstein files were, very much in the news and all kinds of political games were being played with redactions and who gets redacted, who doesn't get redacted. And so I thought let's just redact the name and see how that reads. And there was another aspect to it, and that is he is too much with us. This particular political figure, I think he takes up far too much space in our collective life, and also for many of us in our interior lives. And I think it's a sign of ill health in society when any political figure is taking up that much space. And it's a sign of ill health when politics in general is consuming our lives. There's so much more to life than politics. Politics is important, but there's so much else to life, like nature and our families and sports and music and dancing and our work. And so to me, redacting the name was working on several levels. It was a relief to me, but I felt like it was doing some work just in terms of a commentary on our collective life, and politics is too much with us. And by redacting the name, maybe I can make people a bit more aware of that.
I couldn't agree more. Do you remember when, perhaps this was true when you were a kid, when politics seemed boring? Who knew that we would long for that?
Right. Well, I was a political nerd from about the age 7 or 8 or 9, and so I always found it pretty interesting. But the atmosphere around politics was so much different back then. There was a broad consensus that, Democrats and Republicans, they had their platforms, but there was a lot of variety within the parties. And ultimately, at the end of the day, people's loyalty was to the country, not to the party. And also, in democracy, you win elections and you lose elections. And when you lose elections, particularly the presidency, you become the loyal opposition. And what that means is you have a different platform, different philosophy, but you're loyal to the Constitution, you're loyal to the process, you're loyal to the democracy we have. And so you're going to stay within, the prescribed bounds, prescribed by law and also by custom and tradition. And it worked really well.
Tell us about these mass hysterical crying outbursts that are a driver of the novel. Like, what do the tears mean? Are they a manifestation of some kind of cognitive dissonance between what people want to believe and what they're actually seeing?
Yeah, I mean, when you do this kind of work for a while, hopefully you develop instincts and intuitions and you have feelings about things. You're basing basically everything on your experience. And I was trying to crystallize what I was and still am feeling in the air in the country. And that is, I think there's a lot of sadness out there, and there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and just people feel like a critical mass of people feel like they aren't making it in their lives. They're falling farther and farther behind. There's more and more insecurity in their lives. And so I thought, well, of course people would break down sobbing. To me, that seems like a logical extension of what I'm feeling, what I think I'm feeling, in the country at large. And so there are many historical instances of mass hysteria breaking out. I mean, going back to ancient times. And I thought, well, let's try this in the book. I wasn't sure it was going to work, but I thought, let's try this just as a way to crystallize the uncertainty and fear and anxiety that people are feeling in the country. And this is a manifestation of it. And let's see where it goes.
Why are these a problem for the president in the novel? It doesn't appear that he's concerned that Americans are suffering in this way.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. Um, well, yes, this president, President Redacted, he's nearing the end of his second term, and the Supreme Court has cleared him to run for a third term. The Supreme Court has ruled that the 22nd Amendment, which prevents presidents from serving more than 2 terms, is invalid for some reason. And as a former practicing attorney, I could think of several avenues of attack on the 22nd Amendment, but that's just a given of the novel that he has been cleared to run. And so, he's all gun ho. I'm going for a third term. It's historic. And then the weeping sickness breaks out at one of his rallies. Actually, the first rally he has after the Supreme Court decision. And the rally dissolves in chaos. He has to be hustled off the stage. And as the weeping sickness continues in the weeks that follow, his poll numbers start crashing. And so for him, it's a matter of political survival to find a way to cure or suppress the weeping sickness.
In the novel, we learn about these events first from a college professor, journalist character covering all this for a fictional outlet called the Dallas Daily. You name this character Clarence Thomas. So he's constantly having to clarify people that he is not the Clarence Thomas, the ultra conservative Supreme Court justice. Why did you saddle this character with that name?
Geez, Chris. I mean, there's so much stuff I do. I can't give you a good explanation. It feels right.
Mm.
And but after the fact, I will rationalize it. And so, I mean, his name is Clarence Thomas Jr. He's in his mid 60s. He was living his perfectly normal life. I mean, he's an African American man, grew up in North Texas. He had 27-year career teaching history, politics, and government at Brookhaven Community College. And when he retires, he goes to work for this online nonprofit newspaper in Dallas called the Dallas Daily. And yeah, and so like, I'm messing around with names and it hit me, well, Clarence Thomas Jr., why does that feel right? It's in one sense, it's kind of absurd and funny. This is exactly the kind of cosmic joke that life has a way of playing on us. But also, I think it adds a degree of friction in his life. He can never quite relax when he's out in public because he says his name and people will do a double take. Okay, wait a second. Clarence Thomas, are you? And he'll have to say, no, 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 no. But there are times when his name gets him into places that he wouldn't be able to get into otherwise. He just has to say, I'm Clarence Thomas. And whoever is manning the door looks at him, thinks Clarence Thomas, black guy, right this way, sir. So it does serve a bit of a narrative function throughout the book.
Ben, we also meet a young woman on the White House communications staff named Faith Spack. She has zero illusions about how needy and irrational her boss can be, President Redacted. But the fact that his terrible behavior seems motivated by his emotional immaturity, this somehow makes her like protective over him.
Yeah. Um, and so I knew the book. I mean, Clarence Thomas Jr., he is the outside perspective. He's the outsider trying to work his way in to get to the truth of what's going on. Faith is the insider. And so she works on the comm staff within the White House. She's about 12 steps away from the Oval Office. Um, she's 26 years old, born and bred in Dallas. She was a reality TV star in her teens, and now she's working at the White House. I really wanted to explore the psychological and emotional terrain and the intellectual terrain of a diehard Trump supporter. I mean, those are not my politics, um, but I have a number of friends and a lot of my family are very strong Trump supporters. And so I'm trying to go at this in the most serious way I can. Um, not throwing cheap shots, not ridiculing or mocking. I really want to try to understand what the pull, what the attraction is. And so for Faith, I mean, for one thing, she was born out of wedlock, and so I think it's fair to say she has dad issues. Her father has never been a part of her life. Um, but the flip side to that, and I think the more interesting part is she feels weirdly maternal toward Trump. Um, she recognizes the childish aspects of his character and the needy aspects of his character. And when he's at his worst, when he's storming around and fuming and frustrated and lashing out at people, that's when she feels most maternal toward him and protective of him. And so, those are the two threads of her devotion to him that run throughout the novel.
I thought it was interesting, Ben, that in your telling, neither Faith nor a lot of the other people in the president's immediate orbit seem to be driven by rabid ideology. I mean, we have, real life figures. I think we see Stephen Miller is there under his own name. I think maybe Steve Bannon. But these other people that you fictionalize, they have these jobs and they're leaning into them to do the best they can. But, on the one hand, it's kind of an indictment of people who don't stop and interrogate the impact of the power they hold. But it's also a reminder that ordinary people can get caught up in all kinds of extremist systems simply because that's the job they have.
Yeah, I think I mean the way it's portrayed, the staffers in the White House, and my sense is there's a lot of truth to this. Otherwise I wouldn't have written it this way, is a lot of it comes out of personal, visceral devotion to the president. They they like him. They love him. They love being around him. He exerts a kind of charismatic magnetism, and that's the source of his power and authority. In terms of what policies are, I mean, with the president, this president, and the fictional president, a lot of it is is based on emotion and whim, whatever he's feeling like that day. There are some broad parameters to policy, like, rabid anti-immigration, et cetera, et cetera. But, and so, through the course of the book, I'm trying to work this out through faith. And she does start to interrogate herself and her motives and what kind of effect she personally may be having on the life of the country as the book proceeds.
Okay, I want to talk about Rasputin. I have to admit that I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole reading the novel, looking into the historical Rasputin. In some ways, you know, history might judge him as being unfairly maligned, or at least the extent to which he was maligned might have been unfair. What do we need to know about the historical figure to get a handle on the pro wrestler figure that you call Rasputin in the book?
Yeah. Well, I went down that same rabbit hole, Chris, and you can really get lost down
Yeah.
there. And I think the debate will never end on exactly, what kind of effect the historical Rasputin had in terms of the fall of the Romanov dynasty and the fall of the Russian Empire. Um, the historical Rasputin presented himself as a holy man of the Russian Orthodox Church, and he was alleged to have mystical healing powers. He was a tremendously magnetic figure. Um, he was enormously romantic towards women, and certain women seemed to like him back. And so there's lots of legends about his sexual escapades, lots of stories about his feats of healing. One thing we know for sure is that he was a great help to the Tsar and his family in um, in helping the young Tsarevich, the heir to the throne, get through various serious hemophiliac crises. And I mean, Rasputin would come in. It would seem like the Tsarevich was on his deathbed, and Rasputin would come in, calm everybody down, put his hands on the young Tsarevich, say prayers, murmur words of comfort, and immediately the young Tsarevich would be getting better. And I mean, there are medical explanations for this. I mean, when someone is having a hemophiliac crisis, it's just good common sense to lower the temperature in the room, the emotional temperature. So all these things that were part of the historical Rasputin's legend, um, I found it was quite natural for them to start working their way into the narrative of the book.
He is a hyper masculine figure in the book Rasputin. But in some ways, I was thinking that your Rasputin is a little bit like a trans person, right? He was born as one thing, one person in Buffalo, New York. He identifies now as a Russian mystic, and his champions see no irony there.
Yeah, I mean, we live in crazy times. And so I felt like I had to write a crazy book. And yeah, so it's clear that our Rasputin was born Patrick Walsh Strickland in Buffalo, New York, where he went to high school. He was a football star. He played college football for 2 years, then joined the Army. He was a Green Beret for a while. And after his military service, he goes off to Russia on a religious pilgrimage. And when he surfaces again 6 years later, he claims that he spent those 6 years in a Russian Orthodox monastery. He now speaks fluent Russian, um, and he has assumed for his wrestling career this persona of Rasputin, the wrath of God. But the catch is he never breaks character. He insists he is Rasputin. Even at his house, he insists he's Rasputin. And when people say, "Well, how can you can't be Rasputin?" The original Rasputin died in 1916. He was assassinated. And our Rasputin says, "Oh, well, when I was at the monastery, I learned the mysteries of the Holy Russian Orthodox Church. And someday I will reveal to you how these things can be possible, that I am Rasputin, but now is not the time."
That aspect of the story made me think back to the debate during the Trump Clinton election season, if we can even remember back that far, about whether Donald Trump was just playing this kind of wild character and would kind of sober up if and when he won the presidency. And I wonder if you had those same questions yourself at the time.
You know, I'm very much leaning into that in the book. I think Donald Trump, whatever else you might think of him, say of him, he is a master at blurring that line between reality and fantasy, you know, between the truth of his personality and the presentation. And and it's hard to tell. I mean, whether he's quote acting or whether he's being his quote genuine self. And maybe they're both the same thing. But he's a master at manipulating that area, that gray area. And so when I started writing this book in 2023, um, and it came out of a feeling that Trump was very much a candidate for the presidency in 2024, and also I was feeling like he's got a really good chance of getting back into the White House. And I started thinking, well, if we continue on this same trajectory of this blurring of fantasy and reality, fake versus real, presentation versus some, covering up some deeper, genuine self. If we continue on this same trajectory, what would that look like? Where the fake is baked into the presentation and everybody knows it's fake, and yet it's weirdly genuine, enough so that a critical mass of the country buys it. And so I started thinking about pro wrestling, which is famously fake slash not fake. The wrestlers have various personae that they present in the ring. Um, and as long as they're performing, that's who they are. But then they're out of the ring and they become, instead of being the body, Jesse Ventura became once again Jesse Ventura. And that's what he ran for governor of Minnesota as, about 20 years ago. He ran as Jesse Ventura. He didn't run as his wrestling persona, the body. And I'm thinking, let's take that one step further. What about a wrestler who runs as his wrestling persona? Would the country buy it?
And at some point, if he never comes out of character, it doesn't matter, does it?
It kind of doesn't. I mean, the presentation he's so committed to the presentation. And, at one point, Clarence Thomas, he has spent some time with Rasputin. He's written a couple of articles about him. Somehow he's gotten on the inside track, which becomes clear in the book. And so he ends up being interviewed by Rachel Maddow on, what used to be MSNBC. And she asked Clarence, what exactly is going on here? Does this guy really believe he's Rasputin? Because if he does, that should be ringing all kinds of alarm bells. And so Clarence, he's the best he can put it is this. This guy, Patrick Wolf Strickland, is extremely committed to playing the role of a person who really believes he's Rasputin. And so there's you know, two layers of two degrees of separation, if you will. I mean, you've got the guy who is Patrick, and he's playing a guy who really believes he's Rasputin. And so it's kind of like one of those Russian dolls. You open it up, there's an identical doll inside that's a little bit smaller. You open that up, there's another doll, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, the layers, the blurring of reality and fantasy just keep compounding.
Ben, the lingering questions here about whether the Rasputin character is real, whether he has real magical powers, or he's really the incarnation of this Russian mystic, it also kind of speaks to this moment of AI slop, right? And our growing inability to know what is real and what is not. I mean, are we getting to the point where we have to stop thinking that real matters as much as believable matters?
I think we're in real trouble if we start to think the real doesn't matter. Um, and in order to discern what's real from what's fake, we're really going to have to keep our wits about us. I think otherwise our chances of living fulfilling, happy lives, both as individuals and in the life of the country, are going to be seriously diminished. I mean, reality is stronger than any of us, and we can live fantasy lives for only so long before reality catches up with us. And I will, I will do a riff off of the famous Martin Luther King quote. He said, "The arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." When I was writing this book, I was thinking, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward reality.
Hmm.
And sooner or later, reality catches up with all of us. Now, we might die before it catches up with us, but you know, we can live off credit cards, we can run up huge debts, we can, carry on with, you know, like in our personal lives, just irresponsible behavior based on fantasy, lies, and delusions. Or as a country, we can, be running huge deficits, accumulating tremendous national debt, engage in foreign wars that are costly and futile. We can do all those things and perhaps sustain it for a while, but sooner or later the bill will be presented.
Were there moments in the writing process where you had to like remind yourself, okay, this is supposed to be funny? Um, because there's a lot of like serious stuff at the heart of this satire.
Well, I wanted this book to do its work. Um, to me, the humor of it just seemed natural because, I mean, we live in absurd, often hilarious, just surreal, insane times. Um, but bearing in mind that surreality, that absurdity, um, a lot of people are suffering grave consequences from the tenor and direction of our politics. And, Clarence is trying to figure it out. Um, it's it's not so much, Trump or even Rasputin who he's trying to figure out, although that's his stated mission in the book. Who is Rasputin? What exactly is going on here? But it's as much about Americans and who we are as a country and what brought us to this point. What is in us that brought us to this point? And where do we go from here? And so Clarence, I mean, he's got the scholarly background. He's also got the experiential background. I mean, he's a black man in America. He's really looking critically, sympathetically, but critically at America and at our history and the long legacies of capitalism, slavery, political oppression, etc. And he's trying to figure out what is going on in this country. How did we get to this point, and how might we work ourselves to a better path?
Ben, your novel, your previous novel, Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, satirized the Iraq War era and that kind of moral contradiction of declaring all U.S. soldiers heroes and the implications of that. There's a scene in this book where Faith Spack, the White House communications director, is talking to Bitsy, a former wrestler who's on Rasputin's payroll. They talk about President Bush, and they sort of talk around this, but they reach the conclusion that Trump is a different sort of man from Bush. Like whatever arguments you might have with President Bush and the job he did, President Trump is different. What made you want that scene in this book?
Well, I'm writing from the gut, and you know, Faith is working in the White House. She and Bitsy are at Rasputin's house, and they're talking, and they're just getting to know each other. And Bitsy says, "Well, I was at the White House once." He was a football player at UT. And when they won the national championship, they were all invited to the Bush White House. And he says, Bush was all right. He seemed like a nice guy. And and I've never met the former president, but that's my sense. He is, personally a very decent and genial person to be around. And so I was just writing into that. I think, Trump, by contrast, is much more volatile, you know, he's a handful, I think, to be around on a daily basis. You never know what you're going to get. And my sense is that former President George W. Bush is just a more user friendly package in every way.
In this story, the president and his team at the White House ultimately realize he has made a mistake in elevating the incredibly charismatic Rasputin to consideration for running with him on the ticket. Do you see any signs that the real President Trump is in any way less in control of the narrative now than he has been in the past?
Well, we can never sell this guy short. He's got some kind of powerful political mojo, unlike we have ever seen in this country. And so while he may look at times like he's on the ropes, don't ever count him out. Um, that said, going back to the comment I made earlier about reality, I think if you do enough bad things for bad reasons, sooner or later you will have to pay the consequences. And so it seems to me his hold on power is fraying a bit. We've seen some resistance on the part of the Republican Party to several of his initiatives in the past month, but this guy is he's a genius at a certain kind of politics, and so I'm withholding judgment on that.
I was thinking about years of headlines and stories that I have read, especially, by journalists working for publications whose editorial pages might lean somewhat to the left. There are a lot of stories about like, this is it. This is the time when the Republicans break from Trump or the country breaks from Trump. That has yet to happen in a way that has really had an effect. Maybe the midterms will be different, but there's no guarantee of that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, time and again, I mean, how many times have we thought to ourselves, oh, this is it? I mean, he's gone too far. And for me, the first of those moments was when he disparaged John McCain near the end of the summer in 2015, when he disparaged his war record and said, to me, a hero is somebody who doesn't get captured. And I thought, that's, he's crossed a line there because no one can dispute the the excellence of John McCain's war record, his record as a soldier. But I mean, Trump defies political logic. He is not subject to the usual laws of political gravity, like his peers are. And so, yeah, we're still waiting for that moment, right? When he goes too far. We certainly haven't seen it yet.
Any problematic leader of any organization can wreak havoc on whatever they're in charge of if they're so inclined. But I mean, this book made me think a lot about the culpability that exists for anyone who acquiesces to corrupt leadership, either goes along with it and says, yeah, this is great, or opposes it but doesn't really do anything to stop it. I mean, are we all somehow to blame when things fall apart?
Well, this country has elected Donald Trump president twice. I mean, through you know, the electoral apparatus of this country. In 2016, he didn't win the popular vote, but he won the electoral college. In 2024, he won both the popular vote and the electoral college. And so, I mean, we elected Donald Trump president not once, but twice. And so, I think the first thing we do is have to look at ourselves and in ourselves and the kind of, political life we're leading. I mean, what we're doing in the life of the country and what we're thinking and feeling and how we're acting and whether we're acting on our judgments. I think the thing that leads, you know, maybe the main thing that leads to, the fall of a democracy is numbness, apathy, resignation. People feel like, well, there's nothing I can do. These systems that we're living in are just too huge and too powerful. There's too much money in the system. What can I, a single individual, do? I think that's a normal human reaction in this day and age. Um, but I think we have to resist that. We have to be thinking, aware, alert citizens. We have to be making the best judgments we can and acting on them because I mean, that is the life of a democracy, good faith action. And if we lose that, we lose everything.
Both Clarence Thomas, the reporter character in this book, and Faith Spack start to experience these weird temporary shifts in reality, right? Where the world kind of stops down around them for short periods of time. Will you describe these events for us?
Yeah, again, Chris, when I started this book, I thought I'm going to let it rip and just try to channel the temper of the times into this book and see what happens. And so it only happens when they're on their cell phones. And it happens to Clarence first. He's on his cell phone. He's looking at that cell phone video of a weeping sickness outbreak at a debutante gala in Charleston, South Carolina, and his phone freezes up. And, we've all had that experience. And so a split second after his phone freezes up, everything around him freezes up. Time stops. And it's like, he's in this tableau, this three-dimensional, you know, nothing around him is moving and sound, there's no sound. Um, and so what's going on there? I mean, again, I'm just following my instincts and intuition. My sense is that all these devices in our lives, they're doing something profound to us and with us. And so, how do I crystallize that feeling, that vibe, in the narrative? And I thought, well, let's try this. I mean, reality follows what's happening inside the device. And yeah, as I continued writing, it seemed to make sense in a weird way. It seemed to capture this feeling I was having of what our current reality is, and so I went with it.
One driver of Rasputin's appeal to the American people that the Trump character in this book does not possess is this claim of some kind of religious authority, right, or supernatural power, which occurred to me it is maybe the one mistake that the president redacted made in trying to tie up all authority, right? Like somebody who had all that charisma and a claim to like a direct line to God, that would be unstoppable.
Yeah, that's powerful medicine. Um, in a way, Rasputin is like the super Trump. I mean, he has all the charisma. He's got all the personal magnetism and mojo, but he's got hardcore religion. I mean, he's got serious religion and theology backing him up. He can quote the Bible. Um, he can recite the Russian Orthodox liturgy. Um, he has a chapel at his estate where mass is held. He prays regularly. I mean, he walks the walk and talks the talk in a way that Trump never has. And then you get the turbocharge of these apparent, you know, mystical healing feats that he's capable of, faith healing, and um, and so the country is like, well, you know, tr the president's supporters, they're still the president's supporters, but they're feeling like, okay, this is the new and improved version of the president.
Did you think a lot about balancing the details that would make this book seem like ripped from the headlines with elements that would make it seem timeless, like the kind of thing that high schoolers, if in a perfect world would be assigned to read in 40 years? Like, how much do you care how perishable this book ultimately is?
Well, I'm really not thinking about that. The most I can do when I'm writing it is just try to get the story right. And I'm trying to figure out what the story is. I start out with this germ of an idea. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know who these people are. And the way I figured that out is to write it line by line, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, and hope that the thing reveals itself along the way. And that's really the most I can do. I'm not I'm not thinking about genre. I'm not thinking about posterity. I'm not thinking about pleasing readers or any kind of political agenda. I'm trying to scrape together whatever little talent I have that day, and whatever writing chops I can bring to it in my own experience, and just try to write it as authentically as I can.
You give the faith character some empathy for or concern for the well-being of the president redacted. In order to give that to your character, did you have to go through that exercise yourself? Did you develop a certain amount of empathy for the apparent kind of emotional neediness of President Trump?
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting question. I certainly have to put myself in that psychological and mental mind space. I mean, you've heard of method actors where they dig deep into their own experience and then they try to bring the substance of that experience to whatever role they're playing. And so you could say that I'm a method writer. And if there's 5% of a character in me, I think if I dig deep enough, I can write that character. And so does 5% of me, feel some affinity for the president and admiration for what he's accomplished? I think that's true. There have been moments when I was really proud of him for what he said and did at, certain moments.
What were those moments?
I knew you were going to ask that. Thank you. Um, well, I'm thinking of the debate. It was the Republican primary debate. I don't know if it was in late 2015 or early 2016. And Ted Cruz, who's running for president against Trump, goes off on this long riff about how Trump is from New York and conservatives never come from New York. Donald Trump stands for New York values. He thought he had nailed Trump. And Trump, bides his time, hears Cruz out, and then turns to him and absolutely flattens him with this long riff on 9/11 and how much New York City suffered on 9/11 and how New York City picked itself up and went on. And if that's not America, I don't know what is. And what Ted Cruz just said was extremely insulting. And by the end of that riff, Ted Cruz was basically a little puddle of sweat on the floor, on the debate floor. And I was really cheering for Trump at that moment.
Do you think there's a possibility that American politics will ever go back to being normal and boring and not something that most people feel like they have to keep up with every waking hour?
Well, that's sort of the question, isn't it? I think for that to happen, I think we're going to have to go through a major crisis and the country is going to have to reinvent itself. And we've done that twice. The first was the Civil War and the abolition of slavery in this country. We had to go through this tremendous crisis. And in the aftermath of it, we became a different country, a different society. The second time was in the early 1930s in the Depression. And in response to that existential crisis, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal saved the country and reinvented it. I think, we've reached a crisis point in our politics, and I'm afraid that we are going to suffer some kind of existential economic crisis in the next few years. And so either we're going to lose our country and our democracy in a fundamental way. We may not lose it in name, but lose it in fact. Either we're going to lose it or we're going to have to reinvent it.
Ben Fountain is a National Book Critics Circle Award recipient. His new novel is Rasputin Swims the Potomac. Ben, it's always nice talking with you. Thank you for making time.
Thank you. It's been great, Chris.
Think is distributed by PRX, the Public Radio Exchange. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, anywhere you get podcasts. Again, I'm Chris Boyd. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.